Welcome back, Wanderers. It's Naidra. Season 10 of Diablo is here, and I have actually been having quite a bit of fun with this new season, especially because they introduced the new Chaos armor that really allows you to put together some builds that we haven't seen in a little while, one of them being the Ball Lightning build. And the nice thing about it this time around is we actually can use the specific Ball Lightning uniques that we really haven't been able to do much with in the past. And so for today, I'm going to show you guys the version of Ball Lightning that I've been using, which is the Gravitational Ball Lightning. And it has been really fun to play, but it also has been clearing pretty much everything. You're able to clear up to pit level 100 with this. And while you're not going to die going any further than pit 100, for example, I've gone up to pit 105, the difficulty there becomes dealing enough damage to be able to continue and to be able to complete the pit without necessarily using any mythic equipment. So like I mentioned, we're not using any mythics with this build. However, there will be a couple pieces of chaos armor that you will need in order to make sure that you can make this work. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and take a look and see what the build looks like by jumping into a pit. And then after that, we'll go back to town so we can see exactly what's making it happen. Before we jump into it though, if you guys have not yet subscribed to the channel, please don't forget to do so below. That's really the best way to be able to support me and also help me out in return. All right, let's go ahead and dive right in. Alrighty, so we're going to give this a quick test in a pit tier level 95. Now, the way that this is going to work is you're going to want to make sure you have as many conjurations up as possible, and the only conjuration we're going to have on our skill bar is going to be familiar. Next, you're going to want to make sure that you've got your unstable currents active, and then we also want to have 4 stacks of spark active at all times as well. Each time you get to 4, you just need to cast one more in order to make sure that we keep up the 4 stacks at all times. And then of course, we've got our ball lightning as well. This can have up to 20 ball lightnings out at a time, and the maximum amount of damage that you can do is when you obviously have all 20 of them out. And so we're going to want to primarily focus on making sure we have 20 ball lightnings out at any given time. And then as you can see, we also have Blizzard on our action bar as well. Blizzard is going to refresh our mana or our resource very quickly, and so we do also want to make sure we have that on. Now, besides just restoring our mana, Blizzard does also chill enemies and it can freeze enemies, and that's going to pair up perfectly with our skill tree, allowing us to deal more damage as well. And then lastly, on our skill bar, we also have Teleport. This is a defensive skill. This will help us out in a few ways, which I will show you that once we go back to town, how this is going to be helpful, besides the fact that it does allow us to move around a little bit quicker. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and fire up some ball lightnings, and then we'll go ahead and get started here. So again, this is a pit tier 95. You should be able to clear this within about 5 or 6 minutes, so it shouldn't really take too long. And same can be said for a pit tier 100, maybe a minute or two longer than that with this specific build that we have right now. But once you get up to those pit levels 105 and higher, that's when it's going to take a little bit too long in order to be able to clear it, at least with this build, since we don't have any mythics on our person right now. So again, pretty simple to use. There are a few buttons that we're pushing here to make this happen. Specifically, we are making sure that we've got our sparks out there. We're making sure we've got our conjurations up. And like I mentioned, we also are casting Blizzard. Now, Blizzard doesn't really have to be cast very frequently. We just need it to be out there so that we can take advantage of it. And then of course, we also are freezing enemies with our runes that we have set up right now too. So that just gives us a little bit of extra damage thanks to our skill tree and our Paragon board as well. The challenging part here is making sure that we're maintaining those 20 ball lightnings out at all times, because they do tend to go away pretty quickly. And if we don't have a chance to cast more than 1 ball lightning at a time, then that makes it a little bit challenging to do speed runs with a build like this. But this is easily doing 100 to 200 billion damage. So that really, like I mentioned, is allowing us to clear our pit levels pretty quickly without having to worry about running out of time, or especially without having to worry about dying. So that being said, I think you guys can see how this build works. Let's go back to town to see what's making it happen. Alrighty, so starting off with our equipment, we'll go ahead and start off with our wand. Yes, this build is using a wand because for our offhand, we are going to be using Oaken's Catalyst for the most part, and so that is going to require us to use a one-handed weapon. As far as the weapon is concerned, we want to have something that's got intelligence and preferably a GA on intelligence. We also want to make sure we're getting damage and overpower damage as well. That is going to stack perfectly with our Banished Lord's Talisman. And then we're going to temper on chance for Ball Lightning to cast twice. And we're also going to be tempering on overpower damage as well. We are going to be relying on critical strike damage and also overpower damage to make sure we're dealing as much damage as we are with this build. And so we really are going to try to maximize on this as much as possible. Now, as far as the aspect for this, we are using shredding blades. That is giving us some good amount of vulnerable damage that we're able to utilize with this build. Now, when you go to masterwork this, we want to throw all 3 of your masterworking points into chance for ball lightning to cast twice. Remember, we need to make sure that we've got 20 ball lightnings out at any given time, and the best way to do that is for ball lightning to cast twice. Next up, we've got our boots. For our boots, the most important part about this is that we're getting boots that have the ability to reduce your evades cooldown with attacks. We are using teleport as one of our enchantments, and in order for us to make sure that we're teleporting all the time, the best way to do that is by having that specifically on our boots. Now, aside from that, we are using the gravitational aspect with this. This allows us to pull in our surrounding enemies, allowing us to basically wipe everything out a lot faster instead of having to use the Raiment of the Infinite. And then as far as the stats, we're using intelligence. We don't really care about the maximum life part because we're really not using life with this build. In fact, we have 37 life right now, and that is thanks to our seasonal powers, which we will be covering shortly. But what is important on here, though, is we are also getting +6 to ball lightning thanks to it being masterworked twice. If you can get one that's got a GA on ball lightning or intelligence, that's going to be the best way to go. Now, as far as tempering, we are going to be tempering on evade cooldown reduction with this, and we're also going to be tempering on static discharge. Now, when you look at masterworking this, we're going to put all 3 of your masterworking points into ball lightning for that maximum amount of damage. Next up, we've got our pants. For our pants, we're going to be using Crown Evolution. Now, for this guy, it doesn't really matter which slot you put these in. I don't care whether you have this on the helmet, the chest armor, or the pants. It's all really going to be the same as long as you have the same combination of these chaos armors that we are going to be using. Now, that being said, the focus on this specifically is going to be our cooldown reduction. We want to get one that's got a GA on cooldown reduction if possible. And then all 3 of your masterworking points should also be going into cooldown reduction as well. Taking a look at our gloves, we are going to be using the intercom aspect with our gloves. And for this guy, we want to have something that's got intelligence, critical strike damage. If you can get something with armor instead of the maximum life, that would be great. That would max out your armor completely. We really don't have any survivability issues going up to pit tier 100. Once you get to 105, you may start to take some damage, but you really shouldn't be dying even if your armor is below the armor cap. However, you can fix that problem by swapping out the maximum life with something that's got armor instead. Now, this guy is going to have overpower damage as a temper. And of course, we're also going to be having static discharge as our second temper on here, with all 3 of our masterworking points going into either static discharge or we're going to put it on intelligence. Either way, still going to give you a good amount of damage. If you've already activated all of your rare glyphs on your Paragon board, you can throw those points into static discharge. But if you still need a few more points in order to make sure that you've got all of your rare glyphs activated, then you can go ahead and masterwork your intelligence. For our armor, we are using Lochran's Talisman with this, and it's really nice because we are getting some good resistance from here. We're getting a good percentage of all stats as well. We don't care about the maximum resource. The critical strike damage is really good too. Now, if you've got a couple of these and you're wondering which GA would be best for this, we would prefer to have the GA on critical strike damage and all stats. Either one of those 2 will be just fine. But like I said earlier, we are relying on critical strike damage with this build a bit as well. And so having it on critical strike damage is going to be really helpful. And same goes for masterworking. We want to try to throw all 3 of your masterworking points into critical strike damage if possible. Now, the reason we're using Lochran's Talisman is, well, it's giving us quite a bit more critical strike chance, and it's also going to be giving us some additional critical strike damage. And as you can see, that's based on the amount of mana we have. And we're at 10,000 mana right now, so we are getting a nice little boost coming from our Lochran's Talisman. For our helmet, we're using Esidora's Overflowing Cameo. Now, yes, we do have crackling energy on here because this is a lightning build after all, which is great. But the most important part about this is that we're getting a really good amount of intelligence from this. It's almost 25%, and it's not even been masterworked properly. And so that is really helpful because this is what's allowing me to activate those rare glyphs that otherwise would not be activated. And until we get our Shaco, this is going to be the best way to go. And also is allowing us to deal some additional damage thanks to the specific unique attribute that this does have. Now, when you go to masterwork this, you do want to throw all 3 of your masterworking points into intelligence. That is going to be able to give you the highest damage output that you can have by using this item. If for some reason your boots do not have the attacks reduced, your evades cooldown, but for any reason at all, you could also switch this out for the Flicker Step Chaos Armor. That would give you the ability to basically be able to teleport quite a bit without having to worry about having to replace your boots later on. But looking at damage output, Estadorus is going to be a lot more helpful than the Flicker Step. For our amulet, we are using Banished Lord's Talisman. If you get one that's got AGA on core skills, that's going to be the best way to go. Now, you could also swap this for your gloves. So if you have an amulet that's got a good amount of intelligence and possibly some passive skills on there as well, I would definitely swap this out for your gloves. That's because your intercom aspect is going to give you a bigger boost on your amulet than it is going to give you on your gloves. However, since we don't have that right now and we do have the Banished Lord's Talisman, that is going to work as well. Keeping in mind though, if you do use this as a chaos armor on your gloves instead, you're going to reap the maximum benefit you can from dealing the overpower damage. So it is going to give you a little bit more of a power boost by going that direction. But at this point, I just don't have that. And I'm already using 3 different chaos armors as it is right now. But if you are a step ahead of me and already have that, then that would be the best way to go. Next up, for our first ring, we've got the Galvanic Azurite. And for this guy, we want to get something that's got a GA on Convulsions. And then if you got one with 2 GAs, that would be great. Any of the other ones would be really helpful. However, the most important one for this build is going to be Convulsions. Now, the same thing goes for Masterworking. We want to try to throw all 3 of your Masterworking points into Convulsions as well. And then for our second ring, we are using Tal Rasha's Iridescent Loop. Once again, this has been a staple in every one of my builds since this item came out, and it's just really powerful to not use. The only time that we'd be replacing this is when we get the Ring of Starless Skies. That's the only thing that's really going to be potentially dealing more damage than what we're dealing right now by not having it. However, like I said, this is a build that does not use any Mythic Uniques, and therefore we are going to be using Tal Rasha's. And then last but not least, we've got our offhand. So this guy is going to be the Oaken's Catalyst. And for this, we want to try to get something that's got a GA on Ball Lightning. If you can get one that's got a GA on Transfer Ball Lightning projectiles to cast twice, that would be great. I got one with 3 GAs. Unfortunately, though, I did not get one that's got a Transfer Ball Lightning projectiles to cast twice. But we did get one on pretty much everything else, which is great. Now, ideally, we want to throw all 3 of those Masterworking points once again into Ball Lightning. That's going to help you with dealing the most amount of damage possible. Now, taking a look at our gems and our runes, for our weapon and our offhand, we are going to be using a ruby. This allows us to deal more overpower damage, and because, again, we are using Banished Lords, that does give us a nice little overpower damage boost. And then for our rings and our amulet, we are currently using a skull. We don't need to worry about putting on any diamonds because right now we're already at maximum amount of resistance we can have. So ultimately, we just want to make sure that we're trying to get to that armor cap by adding on these gems. Now, keeping in mind, the reason we are at the cap and also almost the maximum amount of armor is because we are using a couple of incense that does help us with resistance, and it also is helping us out with armor and all stats as well. So keep that in mind. That is something that you want to make sure you're using. Otherwise, our armor would be closer to 500 or 600 right now. But once again, we don't have any survivability issues with this at all. You can take down all endgame bosses and you can solo all of them by yourself. You don't have to worry about any of that. The only thing that this can't do just yet is go beyond pit tiers level 105. For our armor, we're going to be using Topaz in there to give us some additional intelligence. Now, for our chest armor, we are using Nagu and Thul for our runes. This is allowing us to use Mystical Frost Nova, and that is allowing us to keep our enemies frozen. And because of our skill tree, that's going to allow us to deal even more damage to our enemies, and I'll show you what that'll look like in just a moment here. For our pants, this guy is going to be using Sem and Ohm. This gives us an additional 15% damage buff by using Warcry pretty frequently at that. And you guys may notice that we do have Strike of Stormhorn down here, and we also have Vox Omnium on here as well. The reason we have these down here is because Strike of Stormhorn does deal quite a bit more damage. It deals almost twice the amount of damage that we're dealing with Oaken's Catalyst. However, because the Ball Lightnings are not circling us, it does take a little bit longer to take out our enemies, even though it is doing more damage. However, when you get to the boss portion of it, it will take down your bosses quite a bit faster, which is really nice to see. But for general use, Oaken's Catalyst is going to be the better way to go. And same goes for Vox Omnium. It's giving us some additional core attack speed, which our Ball Lightning is considered a core skill. We're getting some non-physical damage on here as well, and intelligence. But really, the part that's most important down here is that it is also casting 2 instances of Spark in addition to casting our Ball Lightning. And because we're casting so many of those, it's always going to make sure that you've got your 4 stacks of your Spark active at all times, meaning we can actually take that off of our skill bar and we can add something like Flame Shield on here as well, so that we can take advantage of the 3rd element with our Tal Rasha's Ring. Now, one way to get around that is when you're casting your skills, if you conjure a familiar first without casting any other skills before it, it's going to summon a fire familiar, which will count towards your Tal Rasha's stacks. However, it will expire pretty quickly. Therefore, you're not going to be able to take full advantage of your Tal Rasha's Ring if you don't have a fire skill on your bar at all times. And so if you're using Strike of Stormhorn, I would recommend switching to your Vox Omnium, so that'll make it a little bit easier for you to not have to cast Spark every time. Plus, it'll give you that additional stack of Tal Rashas for that additional up to 20% increased damage. Hope that made sense. Now, taking a look at our skill tree, we're going to start off our skill tree with Spark, taking it up to Enhanced Spark, and then we're going to finish it up with Glinting Spark. Now, the reason we're taking it up to Glinting Spark is because once we have 4 stacks of this, it'll give us 8% additional critical strike chance, which is helpful. Plus, it also will grant us 1 mana, helping to keep our mana at full, this being paired up with our Blizzard. Moving on down to our core skills, we're really not using any of these specific core skills. However, we are going to be taking 3 points into Elemental Dominance so that we can get that additional 12% times increased damage when we're casting above 50 mana. And with our 10,000 mana that we have, that means we're always going to be taking advantage of that additional 12% damage. Moving on down to our defensives, we're going to be taking 1 point into Teleport, taking it down to Enhanced Teleport, and then finally, we're going to be taking Shimmering Teleport as well. We're taking Shimmering Teleport for that additional damage reduction. We're already getting quite a bit of crackling energy with everything else that we're casting, so we really don't need to get Mystical Teleport. And the damage reduction is really helpful since we are always teleporting with this build, whether it be via Evade or we're actually using Teleport. We're going to be taking advantage of that additional 30% damage reduction at all times. Next up, we've got Glass Cannon. We're going to put all 3 points into this before moving on down to our conjurations. For our conjuration skills, we're going to be taking 1 point into Align the Elements. We're also going to be taking 1 point into Lightning Spear, taking it down to Enhanced Lightning Spear, and finishing this up with Invoked Lightning Spear. Now, the nice thing about this is that it does stun our enemies when critically striking, which is going to be pretty much all of the time. And when we stun our enemies, we do deal quite a bit more lightning damage to them as well. So it's really helpful to have. We're also going to be taking 3 points into Primordial Binding, not for the summon damage and not really for the movement speed, but mostly because we are getting quite a bit of mana regeneration rate with this. And again, this build is all geared around our mana, meaning we need to make sure we have a lot of mana and that it's recovering really quickly. Next up, we're going to be putting 3 points into Mana Shield. And then moving on over to the right, we've got Familiar for 1 point, taking it down to Enhanced Familiar, and finishing this up with Invoked Familiar. Moving on down to our Mastery skills, or our second core skills, we're going to be taking Blizzard for just 1 point, taking it up to Enhanced Blizzard, and then finishing it up with Wizard's Blizzard. Now, this is what allows us to regenerate our mana very quickly. In addition to that, it grants us some additional maximum mana as well. So really helpful. This build would not work very well without having Blizzard on here. Once your mana runs out, that's your health bar as well. And therefore, if you have no mana, you pretty much have no health too, and you'll probably die pretty quickly. So it's really important that you're casting this every once in a while. It doesn't have to be very frequent since, again, we are using the Mystical Frost Nova rune, so we are freezing our enemies in some type of a way, but this is mostly just for the mana recovery. Next up, we're going to take 3 points into Inner Flames before we move on down to Ball Lightning, which is the star of the show. We're going to put 5 points into Ball Lightning, taking it down to Enhanced Ball Lightning, and finally Mage's Ball Lightning. And then we'll finish up our mastery skills with 3 points into Static Discharge and 3 points into Invigorating Conduit. Moving on down to our ultimate skills, we are taking 3 points into Permafrost, we're taking 3 points into Icy Touch, and we're also taking 3 points into Hoarfrost. Now, the benefit of this is our enemies are pretty much always frozen thanks to our runes, And also thanks to the blizzard that we're casting, so we're basically getting a free 18% times additional damage to our frozen enemies and at least 9% to enemies that are chilled. And then of course, we're getting some additional damage output thanks to our permafrost and also our icy touch as well. Next up, we're going to take 5 points into unstable currents and just take it down to prime unstable currents. Now then, we're also going to take 1 point into coursing currents just so that we can get down to electrocution for 1 point. This is going to give us some additional damage reduction. And then finally, we're going to put 3 points into convulsions. And last but not least, for our ultimate skills, we've got our elemental synergies and our evocation, which we're going to put 3 points into both of those. Finally, moving on down to our key passive, we are going to be taking overflowing energy for our key passive. Now then, for our enchantments, we are going to be taking teleport for the first one, and the second one is going to be lightning spear. And then next up, we've got our Paragon board. Starting off with our first board, we're going to start our way on up and over to the right, making our way on up before we stop at the very first glyph, which is going to be Tactician. We'll then continue our way on up to our second board, which will be the Frigid Fate board. And this guy, we're going to be pairing up with the Adept glyph. And then making our way on to the left and over to our third board, we're going to be taking the Static Surge board. And this guy, we're going to be pairing up with the Unleash glyph. Now for this one, we just want to make sure we're getting enough intelligence around it just so that we can activate it. We don't need to go beyond the 40 intelligence for this unless you've already completed your Paragon board and you're just looking to spend extra points, in which case you are going to use whatever extra points you have on intelligence for this build so that we can maximize on our damage. And it also gives us a little bit of boost with our resistances as well. Now making our way on over to our fourth board, all the way over to the right, we're going to be taking the Enchantment Master board. And this guy is going to be paired up with the Elementalist glyph. And then for our fifth and final board, this is going to be the Ceaseless Conduit board. And this is going to be paired up with the Destruction glyph. Now, as far as this is concerned, once you have all of your glyphs activated, you do want to make sure that you grab as much dexterity around this specific glyph as possible to make sure that you're getting the maximum amount of critical strike damage possible. And like I mentioned before, once you've set up your board completely and you don't have anywhere else to go with your points, just go ahead and fill out the rest of the board with as many intelligence nodes you can grab. And then next up for our Mercenary, we are going to be using Subo for our Mercenary. You're going to start off on the left-hand side with Wire Trap, going down to Ready at Hand, taking Cover Fire, and finally Opening Fire. For our reinforcement, we're going to be using Varyana. Varyana is going to be casting Bloodthirst, and this is going to happen anytime we cast any skill in combat. We just want to activate this as much as we can so we can take advantage of that additional attack speed boost. And of course, it also gives us some additional movement speed and other things as well. For our unique Chaos perk, we are using Mana Shield, as mentioned before with this build. It is reducing our life quite a bit, so technically you could die if you run out of mana pretty easily. However, we do have, like I mentioned, about 10,000 mana, and so that is not something that we really have to worry about. For our rare Chaos perks, we're going to be taking Power Siphon, and we're also going to be taking Advanced Techniques. And then last but not least, we've got our Magic Chaos perk, which is going to be Explosive Combinations. Now, another reason for having our Spark on here is because we are casting a basic skill, which is also going to be giving us some additional damage output, stacking up to 3 times. And like I mentioned, we want to have 4 stacks of Spark at all times, meaning we're really double dipping by having this basic skill up on our bar and by utilizing that as well. With that said, that's all I've got for you guys for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me and watching this video. If you guys found this video helpful at all, or if you guys enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. That's the best way you can help me out and support me as well. Until next time, Wanderers.